The manga starts, and we see a Western restaurant completely surrounded by armed police officer. And inside a gangster was screaming at the top of his lungs that he would let the hostages live if they would shut up. As a group of serial murderers and criminals surrounded Steve, he was shivering from the brutal treatment that he could never forget. As the heated exchange ended up turning sour, and the officers ended up breaking into the place, the bombers ended up blowing up everything and even themselves. The story continues, and Steve opens his eyes wide, but he is a little boy. His parents greet him with a weird language, and he questions, just like many did in his shoes. Steve was the dumbest and the biggest loser of all time. He himself calls himself the Justice Champion of America and was ready to deliver the country from corruption. He is half American, but things were pretty bad, as growing up, he had zero fighting power, and he was just the target of bullying from his American neighbors. Now they wanted his ass to go back to his island, and no one really wanted a piece of him here. As he wept, Steve's biggest goal in life was to be a hero. He wanted to start things by joining a football team, but even if he tried, he could never make the height or the weight requirement. In his school, he almost made an image of himself as being the top hero, but it all failed after coming to college and realizing that his parents can't help him like they used to do. He entered the police academy to become an officer but failed and dropped out after witnessing the harsh treatment there. No matter how much his parents helped him, at the end of the day, he would always quit his jobs. After 26 years of taking care of his stupid ass, his parents themselves cut him off after losing their patience, and that is his situation. Right now, he is in big trouble as he was about to dash off after eating $22 worth of food. The hairy police officer reminds him that it won't be good. The owner from the back begs the officer to just take him somewhere else, and he agreed. The waitress shuts the police officer down after he makes a funny joke of mocking their overall customers in the first place. Now that waitress asks Steve if he is Tanaka from the school, and as they chatted, it turned out Steve knew this girl from school. Back in high school, she was pretty wild with boys and famous for her stamina in bed. As the police officer asks if they know each other, she shares that he was a cool kid who she used to have a major crush on. Now hearing this, he just couldn't believe that a pretty girl like her liked him back then, even when he would cringe most of the girls out. She reflects on his current situation and tells him that she is shocked. He lowers his head and tells her that there is nothing he could do, but she lets him know that there is always time to do what you want to do and it is never too late to become a better version of yourself. As the police officer glares at him, tears began to form in his eyes, and Steve was genuinely touched. He thanks her, but all this went south when 6 pieces of trash burst open the door of an empty family restaurant. The police officer was shot right in the center of his head when he asked something, and there Steve and the girl knew that they are in a bigger trouble than ever. The threatening and terrifying-looking dude tells them all in a cold voice not to move an inch. The poor police officer's body drops on Steve, and the few customers inside began to scream. The hijacker immediately fired a few shots and reminds everyone that they are hostages. Now Steve does the first and the last bravest thing here and brings out the police pistol and points at them. He was shivering like a little girl and was panting for air. The leader of their gang asked if he cannot stop shaking, and he challenges him to shoot at them. As one of the prisoners reminds his boss to relax, he threatens Steve and tells him to shoot in 5 seconds, or he can die like a dog. As he began to count down, each word from his mouth terrified Steve, and with a hopeless and pathetic voice, that weak Steve ends up muttering to himself that he can't do it. As tears overflowed, the waitress herself knew that he still can't overcome anything. As they mocked him, they tied everyone down, and their bomb literally burns everything and kills everyone there. And if Steve would have shot, they would still be alive, and his classmate wouldn't have been pushed down by a prisoner. This was Steve, the most useless and scared soul ever. He questioned if he would be like this forever, and if in the future he would find someone precious, would he act this way as well? After the blast, he died and was brought to this new world. His mother and father are both kind people who are the most well-known people in the village. His father is also the leader of a group who hunts down bandits hiding in nearby places. Now, this world is completely different from what he remembers, and there are some parts of him that still haven't accepted everything here. Magic and enchantment are things that are common, and monsters dwell in every corner of this world. As his mother prepared a new dish for him, he was skeptical to try it, but when he did, he bites into the hard flesh and realizes that it was much better than what he had thought. His taste buds have slowly developed, and he has been able to adjust. Steve has already lost the feeling of being embraced by his own parents. The last time he remembers with his parents were when his father kicked him out to figure himself out. He also recalls that he died like a loser. As his mother fed him more, after he became emotional, they could not handle their son's teary face. Now Steve was also given some special powers. He points his hand at a big stone, and we learn that he has two powers, absorb and release. Whatever he touches, he can absorb it and release it whenever he commands so. There is also a condition: he can only use his left hand to absorb and his right to release. Although this is a very cool power, Steve is still not prepared for the things he is about to encounter. He does a lot of experimenting with his power, and this time he chants the spell, and a speedy bullet of stone cracks open a boulder. He was sure that this is much more powerful than any gun he could imagine, and as he was thinking this, he hears something very unexpected from the side. He glances to his side and sees a little girl hiding on top of a tree, and a hideous and terrifying-looking monster was roaming around her. It used its sharp nails to get to her, and that poor girl ends up crying for her mother. Steve sees this terrifying sight from afar, and he began to wonder just what he could do. As much as he wanted to help, his human nature was still intact. He was ready to just run and call for help, but the girl's eyes end up seeing him sneaking behind a tree. He quickly hides, and slowly the guilt and terror began to surround him. He also noticed that she stopped screaming, and when he checked again, that girl was still there but moving her head. That timid soul was tearing up and begging him not to come for her help. She told him to run away and not risk himself, or do anything stupid. As guilt moved every fiber of his being, he questioned if he would really leave such a good kid for himself. He pondered if he would be the same lame person he is, and from the back, his classmate mutters to him and asked him if he is going to be still even in this situation. That day when the group of prisoners hijacked the restaurant, his classmate was pushed down, and a terrible thing happened to her. As the man reminded her about how this all could have been avoided if Steve would have shot, he mocked him for looking at his classmate getting done. All Steve could do was see her experience terror beyond reasoning, and she herself glares at him and tells him to drop dead. Just remembering this, he shouts the phrase and comes out of his hiding. The monster hears it loud and clear and glares at him with its eyes. And Steve just made the second biggest mistake in his life, which would cost him his life. The terrifying monster breathes out and stood up straight, and in the next second, he launches itself towards him. Compared to the mouth of that monster, Steve was nowhere close to the fighting or running, and he accepted his fate. He knew he could at least try to cast one spell in the meantime, and he imagines the same bullet he did earlier, and as he shot it, the monster completely got drilled in just a few nanoseconds. The sheer scale of the bullet was so great that it tore the monster apart with ease, and all its organs just disappeared. As he glances at his hand, he began to feel sick, and the little girl climbs down from the tree, and as they both stood there, she begins to cry and she grabs onto him. Her innocent and helpless face really moved him from the inside, and she began to thank him over and over again. He immediately remembers a painful encounter in his previous life where he helped some of his classmates, and instead of thanking him, they complained to him about being all high and mighty. This just made him realize that perhaps his dream of becoming a hero for at least one person came to life, and tears overflowed from his eyes as well. He hugs her as well, and as they became friends, they walked back to the village together, and Steve promises himself that in this life he would not be stopped by anything and would do anything to move forward. He also asks the name of the person he saved, and she smiles at him and lets him know that she is Misha. As they walked back home, this life was a gift for him that he could never pay back. Each day was a blessing, and both his parents were there to support him in everything. He also got a bit closer to that girl he saved, and by time he ended up meeting another friend of his whom he saved from some bullies. Steve now was an adult, and his magic soon became famous, and he was best known for eliminating dangerous monsters. Misha also ends up getting closer to him, and he also proposed to her. His life finally moved on, and he was ready to marry her. After 13 years of meeting Misha, Steve began to fight bigger and more stronger monsters. A single blow from one of the monster crushed everything in its way. A girl with golden hair was bleeding, and it seemed like that she was struggling to keep up. Steve touches the ground and chants a race, and in the next second, the ground generates a sharp needle, which pierces through the monster and kills it immediately. As the fighting stops, the group glances back and sees Steve panting. They call out to his new name, Chris, and as the villagers compliment his skills, he was still bad at handling this. The two comrades of his praised his skill, and the girl herself blushed and exclaimed how amazing of a person he truly is. After slaying the monster, they were returning back to their village, and Serb asks if his wedding would take place after he returns. He replies and tells him that he really didn't want to do this job, but since all the preparation for his wedding is done, he would get it done as soon as possible. As he remembered the sight of his fiancée, he smiled, but Alicia on the other hand was jealous. Serb ends up asking if she hates his wife, and she shuts him down. In the next second things were about to turn dark. He notices that black smoke was coming from the town's direction, and as they dash to check, they end up seeing the most horrifying and brutal things they could imagine. The whole town was slaughtered, and every single one of those poor souls didn't make it and laid out on the street as everything around them burned to a crisp. Everything was gone. The killers didn't spare women, old people, or even the younger generations. As the scene froze them, Steve wondered just who could have done these horrible things, and the damage was not just the town district, it was done to the nearby towns as well. Alicia from the back calls out to Chris and tells him that there's a survivor. He heals him a bit so he could talk freely, and he shares that they were 10 thugs who came to the village, and at first everyone thought that they were some washed-up thugs, but a fight began, and they brought out weapons of mass destruction and killed everyone in their sights. As that man cried, he shares that they fired things that were impossible to stop no matter what they did. Alicia was sure that it might be the war god relic from the gods, but that man ends up telling them that all the thugs went over to their village. Hearing this, their world flipped upside down, and they dashed with everything they had. Poor Alicia began to cry, and they kept running, but everything was already too late, and when he came across his vibrant home. Hell was the perfect phrase to describe its condition. All the houses were set ablaze, and the thick black smoke covered everything. Bodies piled up so much that everywhere there were bodies with blood. As the three souls realized what had just happened, Steve on the other hand was just unable to process the sheer amount of loss that he was experiencing. His old man and mother were also laying there bleeding, but they had already fought their battles and lost. Poor souls died in the most gruesome way imaginable. He immediately remembered to check up on his loved one, and he dashed to check up on her, and noises from the back also alerted him. He ran, and these were the most important dashes of his life. He shouts out that he would surely protect her. A man exclaims and questions why the women were ending everything for themselves, and the man complains to him that the girl resists, and in this way, they do the unthinkable. He screams at some of the hostages, and as he chants an absorbed spell, all of them panic, and Chris's eyes just widen after realizing that his fate was already crushed from the beginning, and once a loser is always a loser. He glances down and sees the most gut-wrenching, emotional, and painful sight that never in a million years would anyone want to wish on their enemies. His beloved was laying in her own blood, completely helpless and torn apart. The abyss of darkness surrounds his every ounce of humanity, and the thug began to ask if he is the family of this pig. They mocked about how they were trying to have their way with her, but she resisted so much, and he couldn't hold back and ended up shooting her. As they laughed, they were the reincarnation of low-life pests and demons. They pointed their guns at him and began to shoot at Chris, but he chants a release spell and blocks all the bullets. They kept firing at him, and he brings out his hand and chants the most brutal spell to date. He made sure that it was high speed enough to break the sound barrier and kill them in the most inhumane way. He glares with hollow and empty eyes and chants release, and in an instant, all of their bodies scatter, creating a river of blood, and their body parts floated around the place. In mere seconds, 9 pieces of trash were wiped out with just one push from his chant, and as they got gaping holes in their bodies, it rained blood, and one of the trash cried at the top of his lungs about his arm which was severed by Chris, and poor Steve grabs onto the love of his life, who didn't deserve anything like this, and tears overflowed. He cried out and blamed himself for going somewhere else and not being there, and remembers all his precious family who died like dogs. He calls out to his beloved and asks where she is, and tears fell on her face, and he grunted like the most broken and helpless man, filled with the greatest darkness and sadness. He blamed himself and cried there, and he apologized to everyone. One word circled his mind, that even in his second life, some are not blessed with everything. The trash thug was still grunting from excruciating pain, and he even peed himself, and it seemed all his manliness went away. Chris approached him and questioned him if he knows why he was still alive. He begins to beg, and immediately he fires a bullet which tears his right ear completely, and he begins to confess that he did whatever his boss told him to do. He shares his boss to be the gunmaker. Chris flinches from hearing this word and remembers the symbol on the gun, and recalls that the prisoner who hijacked the restaurant had this mark on his head. That day he also saw other prisoners with the leader. One of them was Arthur Branch, who was the trashiest of trash. He was the EDP of manga. Then there was the trash gunmaker, also known to everyone as Smith Spring. He killed 34 people, and weapons were his thing to meddle with. He did weapon trading and a ton of disgusting things. On the other side was another piece of trash, the bomber, also called Smith. He was the hero of illegal immigrants and Americans since he blew up several government places. Donnie-Wah was the darkest human with the most twisted mind, with a conviction of 29 kills. He was a leader of a terrible group. Jeff Fisher was a downer in manga but with a toned face and way more records under his belt. And lastly, the garbage of flesh, the trash who pushed himself on his classmate, Teddy Angelo. He was the most twisted when it came to women, and he did terrible, terrible things to them. That day he remembered his classmates' cries, and he was sure that the gunmaker is alive in this world for sure. Over on the other side, the magic gun bandits has already captured a stronghold from the Republic. Inside, there are chants going on of people worshipping the one and only gunmaker. As a figure gets there, a girl with very sharp teeth greets them all and begins to fire shots in the air. She exclaims and tells them that they will create a nation of bandits and rule with an iron fist. This girl was the reincarnation of the bulky gunmaker we saw earlier, and as he is totally into the role of being a girl, someone from the back greets her and shares that there is a serious situation. It seems like a place that they had eyes on was devastated completely. She complains about how weak the military power is, and all the soldiers are just a bunch of idiots waving their spears and swords. Her underling shares that the nation was killed by a swarm of goblins who attacked the castle so vigorously that the walls couldn't hold back. As another explains the gruesome acts of violence the goblins did, they talk, and it seems like the goblin dragged women of the city somewhere. The goblins were also carving some weird shapes on themselves, and when her underling shares the shape with her, the gunmaker immediately stands up, and she begins to laugh like crazy. As they wondered what was happening, it seemed like she knew who is behind the collapse of a big city. She shakes her head off and reminds herself that she would kill anyone who would dare to step in her way. As we see the situation of different people, they all were connected to the reincarnation cycle, and each of them were busy with their own stuff. Alicia and Serb also witnessed the sad sight of Chris, and this time he was sure that it all went down because he failed to kill those pieces of trash. He collects himself, and this time he is going to rip the wall of fear and deliver the most brutal justice to his beloved and the whole world. With rageful eyes, he promises himself to kill all of the prisoners no matter what. The cycle of the gunmakers thus continued, and they ravaged town after town. This time they were killing the remaining survivors one by one, and as two men were ready to shoot and kill, they kill him, the other survivor who was near the killed man. He began to wet himself. The two men laughed it off, and as they were busy with this, their arm completely goes missing, and from the side Chris joins them and asks them in a chilling voice where their leader is. A few of their guys began to attack him, and as they fired their bullets at Chris, there were hundreds of them. Chris brings out his left hand and absorbs every single one of them, and then sends them all back as a token of love, and every single one of them scatters like sand. The whole village reunites with their loved ones one more time, and 2 people thanked Alicia for her heroic actions. She reminds them that all she did was stand there, and from the side, a loud grunting noise came, and it seemed like Chris was interrogating someone. The nobody thug who killed hundreds was sweating heavily and couldn't even form words. He spewed that they all follow a single leader, who just accepts them, and shares that there is no hierarchy of power, rather it is just one group and she just expands it. With a cold voice he tells him to keep on, and he shares that they have never seen her hideout. All his talk was kind of useless since he shared that only the division and branch leaders are aware of such things. As he begged Chris for his life, he didn't hesitate and killed him in a heartless way. As he gurgled blood, with cold eyes he lets them know that he would be killing everyone involved in this. The survivors of the village themselves were somewhat scared of Chris, and Alicia could only worry for him. As they walked, Alicia kept following him around and asked why he has become cold to everyone. He lets her know that he fulfilled his duty, and shares that he is not hungry for thanks and praises. He shares that half of the village was already wiped out, and no matter what he could have done, there was no way he could have saved them all. The guilt and weight of knowing that hundreds are dying out there, and he always gets to them late, really weighed him down. Alicia asks if he is holding up after what he witnessed, but despite her worry, he was already distant from everyone. The next things that he said were the saddest things that anyone could ever say. He shares that he is a useless piece of trash, who tried to become a hero, and the sacrifice and burden of this cursed title was more grim than ever. He cries about losing everyone who he cared for in his life, and he tells her that from now on he would never experience the hell he did earlier. The pain in the hole in his heart was too deep that it shattered his fundamental core values so much that he was done with loving someone and losing them again. He proposes to her that she would have been better if she tagged along with Serb. Hearing this, she gets closer to him, and asks if he hates being together with her. He yells at her and tells her that he trusts her a lot, and if he ends up in a dangerous situation, he would like to face it alone and not risk anyone else important to him. He reminds her and tells her that she is important to him, and the only person left in this world who knows him. As Alicia heard these words, flutters in her heart were easily visible from afar, and these were the perfect words she wanted to hear from him. The next big area around them which was mysterious was the goblin attack which happened in the nearby town that they were about to pass from. They stopped by a different place to rest, and Alicia reminds him that goblins are a serious threat to nearby people. With slight blushes, she asks him if he would like to help the struggling people and kill some of the goblins, and in this way, he could gather himself once again. With a cold voice, he lets her know that in this world, the problems of people should be dealt with by themselves. He tells her that he would now only focus on his problem and path and not care about a third person he has never seen or met. He ends their talk and reminds her that perhaps she gives him more credit than he deserves. Hearing this, the old Chris that she had a crush on was slowly changing for the worst, and that night as they both were ready to sleep, she lets out a big sigh while relaxing in the bathtub. She wondered if he would even hold on, and things are becoming serious as the roots of these crimes are deeper than ever. The hatred and rage for the gunmaker is very intense, and she herself knew that he is being devoured by hate. She reflects that lately he has been on a rampage of killing the thugs and seeing him say painful things about himself. It pains her heart more than anything. She ends up imagining the worst fate for him where he would eventually die while fighting the gunmaker, and immediately she knew that these days with him are a gift, and perhaps someday she would lose him as well. After the bath, she opens the door and guiltily stands near him. Now from one look at this scene, it was clear that her love for him was so strong that she really wanted every piece of his trouble, pain, and love. She leans in more, and as her heart raced, she blushed and was ready to embrace him, but she noticed that poor Chris was weeping for his lost beloved, and tears overflowed in his sleep. As she heard this, she realizes that she is no better than those people who force themselves on others. She began to cry, and right there she understood that her feelings for him were so strong that she wanted to satisfy herself by making him hers. For all her life, she loved him more than anything, but the position of his lover was Misha's, but as she passed away, she wanted Chris all for herself. She clenched herself and cried, and the next day she was more quieter than usual. He asks if there is anything wrong, and she shakes him off, but deep down, guilt was there, and she was not doing good. He begins to share his plan to infiltrate the base of the bandit, and kill them slowly by separating them, and as he shared the details, he was shouldering everything on himself and gave Alicia a job to be a lookout for him. She knew that he was pushing her to the side, and she remembers her actions, and as she gathered herself and lets him know that she would like to help him as well. Just as she said this, a rustling sound from the back scares both of them, and they look back to see a man being chased by 4 goblins. Immediately, Chris casts a spell and kills all of them in a second, and after he checks them, the man begins to thank them over and over again. He begins to share the nightmare situation they were going through. He shares that they were attacked by hordes and hordes of goblins who did so much damage that many people didn't even have the time to think. He cried like a broken man and begged them to help his village, and shares that girls are kept alive and they all were hiding from them. As he begged and begged, it was all up to Chris to decide what to do. He gets up and begins to share how he would heal him, but he didn't mention about going there. Alicia asks him if he would like to help them, but on his face was a grim and troubled expression, and she knew that he didn't want to help anyone out. She screams at him and tells him to man up and help the little girls who are trapped, and he replies that his hands are already full of troubles. She comforts him and begs him to stop blaming everything on himself, and as he glares through her, she begs him to start trusting himself once again and not fall into the darkness that others want him to fall into. She also points out that she herself knows that he doesn't want to lose anyone else important to him. But Chris snaps completely. He asks her if she thinks that this messed up stuff happened to him for once. He screams at her and tells her that for years he had thought that this time he finally saved someone important to him, but he failed, and his beloved was killed once more. He screamed that he couldn't even save one person, and how could he be a hero who saves the world? The whole and scummy past he had was all covered by the smile of Misha, and he shouts at her, and asks if he is wrong for being afraid to lose a person once again. He tells her that he would rather focus on himself than to worry about others. He realizes that he perhaps said some other harsh things, and he spins around and tells Alicia that he didn't mean to say harsh things to her. She spins around and tells him to focus on his mission and carry on. She clenches her sword and lets him know that she would handle the goblins, and he could figure his own stuff out. As he calls out to her, she reminds him that her skills are top-notch, and she could handle a good number of goblins all by herself. She dashes off and told him to handle his bandit mission all by himself. She ran and was confident to handle 100 or even 200 goblins all by herself, and reflected that she hated to see Chris say hopeless things about himself. As she approached the site, all her hopes vanished when she saw the sight of misery and fear in front of her. Instead of a few hundred goblins, there were thousands, and all of them were armed and ready to break into the church, and the people outside who failed to get into the church were a subject of horrible things. They were being eaten alive, used to death, and the remaining were slowly breaking the thick church door. As Alicia saw this, she herself panicked a bit, and what was more wild was the fact that the goblins were acting differently. To put it in a better phrasing, the goblins were 100 times more aggressive, and they didn't care if they died or not. She wanted to jump in like a hero and defeat all of them, but she couldn't even think of killing and making a dent in their army. As the cries from the church became louder, the goblins had climbed over on the tall structure and were trying to break open the windows, and inside, a few poor girls were shivering from fear. The goblins tried to push open the iron window, and the girls screamed in terror, but the screams made each goblin even more excited. From the back, the goblins hear a loud thud, and when they looked back, they saw Alicia standing there after killing a couple of goblins all by herself. She screams at all of them. Although this seemed heroic, she was very fearful of the things that she had just pulled off. The goblins began to throw stones at her, and she used one of her skills, Repel, to deal with them. She additionally casts a firebomb spell and blows everything up. The fire covered everything. But few stubborn goblins still came to her, and it was like they feared nothing. She sliced them, and this cycle of hers continued for a while, and just like that, piles of bodies lined up, and in the center, Alicia was panting for air after fighting hordes and hordes of goblins. The remaining goblins began to toss rocks at her head, and this was a clever tactic of theirs. Goblins were smart, and knew that she had lost a lot of energy, and as the rocks kept coming, the goblins decided to jump on her one more time, and she closes her eyes, ready to accept her fate. Suddenly the sharp knives in their hand break, and a big wall surrounds Alicia. From the back, Chris apologizes for being late, and as he puts his right arm on the ground, he was casting a spell and said sorry for leaving her all alone. She smiles at him and lets him know that she handled 300 goblins, and would now leave the rest to him. He knew just what he had to do, and he chants a spell and a wall appears, and the goblins began to pile all around it. He gathers a large portion of his energy and casts an absorb spell on the ground, and suddenly a big sinkhole appears on the ground and all the remaining goblins fall down. He brings out his hand, and in the next second, he chants a release spell, and thousands of bullets go flying and ripping apart all the goblins one by one. This was so strong that even he himself couldn't handle this without damage. After the horror, it was a time of reunion, and as the families came together, Alicia couldn't be more happier. Chris was still remembering the fact that he was trying to abandon them all. He noticed that on the goblins there were heart marks which were the same as on the creepy guy who forced himself on Jessica, his classmate from Earth. Alicia points at his nose and tells him to wipe his nose, and he shares that he overused his magic in a short period of time, which caused him to bleed. He asks her if she is fine, and as she blushes, she tells him to stop apologizing, and they shared a wholesome and beautiful healing moment together. Chris himself understood that Alicia was right about everything. They kept remembering things from the past, and with a beautiful face, she lets him know that from the very beginning, both Misha and her fell for him when he saved them with everything he had. Now hearing this, Chris finally understood that his world is not over and there is still a reason for him to fight on and survive longer. Tears began to form in his eyes, and she comforts him all the way. Later in the series, we learn that the trash who did terrible things to Jessica was actually a trash in this world as well. 20 young girls lost their honor and lives from his hand. Chris himself ends up meeting Jessica from Earth one more time,